In the year 2002, a popular Japanese trading card game called Yu-Gi-Oh! Made its way overseas. Kids across America were mesmerized by its dramatic, bizarre, and downright cool presentation. Monsters look anywhere from awe-inspiring to horrific, and the characters from the anime had very distinct designs, even when compared to other anime airing at the time. Of course, one of those characters stuck out with his triple-colored hair towering above everyone else's. Yami Yugi would be seen on the front cover of most Yu-Gi-Oh! Merchandise, including every booster pack that was released from 2002 to 2004. But the physical cards weren't the only way to experience the game. For about a decade, Konami would release lots of video game adaptations. Multiple per year, in fact. People only passingly interested in the series may remember seeing a few on store shelves, but trust me when I say that there are a lot that have come and gone. Other YouTubers like Jaywitz and Picasperi have shed light on what we'll call the adventurous ones. However, these don't play the card game by its real-life rules. Not even all the Yu-Gi-Oh! Video games that play the card game use the correct rules. I'm talking Dark Duel Stories, The Sacred Cards, Reach of Destruction, Duels of the Roses, and so on. While all of those do deserve discussion, I'll be focusing on the ones that stayed true to the way duelists were playing on tables, or, at the very least, the ones that were trying to. You'll see what I mean soon. Even narrowing the list down that far, we're still left with 20 separate games, and that's only counting Game Boy Advance, DS, and PSP. So, let's take this one step at a time. Today, we'll look at the first 3 GBA titles: Eternal Duelist Soul, Stairway to the Destined Duel, and World Championships 2004. So, normally what I'll be doing in this series is breaking down a game into 5 sections, concluding what merit it has being played nowadays. But the first 3 games are so painfully barebone and similar to each other, I don't think it makes much sense to cover them in separate videos. Instead, I'll discuss all 3 back-to-back in each section to be compared to one another. Keep in mind that the way I'm rating these games is both as a video game fan and a Yu-Gi-Oh! Player. We are looking at a very niche genre here, with the biggest selling point being that you get to play the card game portably without needing physical cards. But all of these games accomplish that out of the gate, so I care more about what they do to make that experience as fun as possible. I'll be blunt, I don't really care for any of these 3 games, or at least not compared to the ones we get later down the line. I didn't grow up with any of them, so I have no nostalgic attachments, and I feel a lot of what they introduce sets the design philosophy for future games that do it better. So rather than spend this video being excessively harsh, let's talk about the groundwork they put in place for the series moving forward. Eternal Duelist Soul is very straight to the point. You're given a choice between 3 initial decks, but regardless of your choice, about a fourth of your deck is guaranteed to be the same. Red is the best choice solely because it gives a higher chance of starting off with 7-colored fish, which is the strongest non-tribute monster you can begin the game with at 1800 attack. Once you've selected a deck, you're presented with the game's main menu. There are 7 options here, but the main content of the game falls under Campaign. Here, you'll find Tristan, Taya, Yugi, Joey, and Bakura waiting to be selected to duel. There are other screens to scroll through of currently locked characters. To access them, you'll need to duel the ones you already have. After defeating each Tier 1 duelist twice, you unlock Tier 2, beat each of them 3 times, and you unlock Tier 3, so on and so forth. Every time you win a duel, you earn a booster pack. This is the main way to build your collection in hopes to improve the mediocre deck you begin the game with. The other reason to keep dueling is to unlock more booster packs, which have conditions to appear based on how many times you've beaten certain characters. There are also weekend duels, which are not weekly, they're monthly. And they're not duels, they're 2 out of 3 matches. They should be called monthly matches. Anyways, the cycle continues until you reach the last section, Tier 5. The Duel Robot is automatically available, while Pegasus is unlocked by having the Cartoon World. But you probably noticed that I don't have the final 2 characters unlocked. This was intentional, because compared to everything else in the game, they are a huge hassle. Truesdale, or Yugi's grandpa, is unlocked by collecting all 819 available cards. That's a pretty massive task considering how packs are plagued by RNG. Simon, on the other hand, can only be unlocked by being defeated in the national tournament. Well, what is that? This brings us to the calendar system. Basically, there are certain events that happen on certain days of the week, like the weekend duels. The weekly Yu-Gi-Oh!, not to be confused with Weekend Duels, and Yu-Gi-Oh! Magazine give you free cards, but nothing I've listed so far is a tournament. For some reason, there are full years in this game, like they go past 2099. After I passed a century, I stopped counting how far it went. The only way to move time forward is by dueling. 1 duel equals 1 day. You start the game in January, so when's the tournament? November 4th. I'm not kidding. Everything we've unlocked so far has totaled 70 duels, plus any extra weekend duels we may have had. I personally didn't lose at any point, so I was pretty close to the bare minimum. In my playthrough, I landed on March 16th as the day I was done playing. To get to the national tournament, I would need to duel over 200 more times to get to unlock Simon. Ridiculous. The payoff for beating Simon is supposed to be receiving one copy of every card in the game, which automatically will unlock Truesdale. If you're really adamant about doing this, technically unlocking every pack in the game will take you 210 days at minimum, but this involves beating every character 10 times and specific characters 20 times. But if you're just gonna get every card by that point anyways, I don't know what the point of this is. Unless you're 100%ing, it feels pointless. People who have played EDS before have probably noticed I haven't mentioned the password machine. The password machine allows you to take the code of a real-life Yu-Gi-Oh card and put it into the game, which will grant you one copy of that card to use without having to pull it from a booster pack. Once you've redeemed this code, you can't do it again for the same card, limiting its use to just getting one. Doing this is as simple as finding code lists online and looking for the card you want, bypassing a lot of the collecting aspect. You don't have to wait for the booster pack to appear that has the card you're looking for, unless you're trying to get 2 or 3 copies. If your immediate thought when hearing this was, hey, that's another way to unlock Truesdale without having to beat Simon or unlock all the packs, then sure, enjoy your trophy at the other end of putting every code in the game into the machine for literal hours. No thank you. I personally went through the list and added every card that was good at the time to make the experience of dueling as painless as possible. A lot of people will hear that and say it eliminates proper deck building and progression, and I don't disagree, but we'll come back to that in a later section. For now, we'll talk about the next game. Stairway to the Destined Duel is interesting in that gameplay-wise it's nearly identical to EDS, but there's actually somewhat of a story in this game. You're placed onto a map, which will either have duelists or passengers in different districts. When you select a district, you get to choose a person within it to talk to. If it's a duelist, you duel, and if it's a passenger, they give some dialogue and leave. And like in Eternal Duelist Soul, this will move the calendar one day forward. But what immediately makes this game more interesting is that the characters aren't sitting on that selection screen anymore. You have to find them. There are also tournaments that happen weekly and monthly. This creates a situation where you're trying to find all the duelists and beat them so you identify them on the map, but also want to take part in the competitions. These concepts combine together once a month for a challenge called Target Week, where you're asked to locate 2 duelists specifically and beat them before the week is over. Roland even tells you this requires you to search the city, but realistically in order to do this you're going to have to know where these duelists generally are and how to get there within 7 days, which is hard to figure out within that week. You will have to have dueled them beforehand. On top of the various events, you don't even have to duel every single day. Talking to passengers will make a day go by without forcing you into unwanted confrontations. I cannot express how grateful I am they added this. More to do, and it's optional. But that's not all. There's a third type of encounter that ties into the plot. Occasionally there will be a warning given to the player about ghouls, or rare hunters as we know them, causing trouble around the area. If this happens, it's very likely the next time you confront a passenger, you'll duel one of these villains. Once you beat them, you're gonna have to wait for another announcement. I'm not positive, but I think they're mapped to certain parts of the city just like regular duelists. I dueled them all except Arcana, but kept running into strings. Eventually, I looked up a video of someone dueling Arcana and went to the location they had found him, and sure enough he was there, so I assume that's right. Once you've defeated all the ghouls, Truesdale will alert you that Taya has been brainwashed. Technically, Anzu, because for some reason they didn't translate her name in this game, despite doing it in the last one, but okay. While being mind-controlled by Merrick, she says that Joey has been kidnapped, and if you want them both to be safe, you need to follow her to a place called the Pyramid. Once there, you duel 5 times consecutively. Taya, some ghouls, and finally Joey, breaking their brainwash. Joey says Merrick is dangerous, and you duel him in the final room. You beat him, wake up from your dream, oh god. Joey and Taya are fine, and go find Yugi, saying they'll catch up with you later. What's kind of funny about this arc is it feels a lot like since the Battle City Finals hadn't finished in the anime, they came up with a generic plot using Merrick's Egyptian roots. Joey even points out after you save him that it's up to you to beat Merrick because Yugi isn't there. This is not the last time a Yu-Gi-Oh game will do this, by the way. After you beat this part of the game, there are tournaments that unlock called limitation tournaments. These force a certain amount of your deck to be dedicated to some kind of theme or restriction. But if you want to keep going around the city dueling, the ghouls are now available all the time instead of just from the warnings. I gotta say, while the campaign isn't mind-blowing, and that twist isn't winning any Emmys, this game is leaps and bounds better than Eternal Duelist Soul. There are actual activities to do in this game to give you some sort of variety, even if the end result is just more dueling. Although the card pool has barely changed, there's enough to do here for me to at least see the merit in replaying it, at least compared to the next game. World Championships 2004 is a massive step backwards, on several fronts. This game decided to completely shirk the entire map and tournament concept from Stairway and return to a selection screen like EDS, but now the menu has even fewer options. We dropped from 7 to 4, and notably the calendar is gone. I know, I complained about the calendar system in EDS, but that's because of how poorly it was used, not because it was a bad idea. Stairway proved that it could be done a bit better. So, what do you do in this game? Well, just like before, you're given a basic deck. But this one's surprisingly interesting. There are certain cards you're guaranteed to start with, and a few that are chosen from a selection. But the remainder of your deck is entirely random, as in potentially any cards in the game. This is actually crazy in terms of replay value, but too bad the rest of the game screams, please don't play me. Just like EDS, the campaign starts with 5 characters: Taya, Tristan, Bakura, Yugi, and Truesdale? Kinda weird that the guy who was so hard to get in the first game is now unlocked automatically, but okay, whatever. You'll notice that each of them have stat bars on the bottom. These are meant to indicate areas they excel in, but I won't bother going over it because it's not worth it for reasons you'll see soon. Just like before, progressing is twofold. You unlock characters, and you unlock packs to get more cards. And to anyone who didn't like my use of the password machine, congratulations! They removed it from this game. It's not even an option anymore. You have to use whatever cards are thrusted on you at the beginning. But this is easier to forgive since the starting deck and pack unlocking are the most interesting things about this game. And no, it's not because it's my first time actually focusing on it. It's because we're finally at a point where you can kind of make different strategies other than good cards.deck, but we'll cover that more in depth later. The Tier 1 opponents are a mixed bag. Taya, Tristan, and Bakura are all terrible and barely put up a fight. Truesdale uses an Exodia deck littered with weak normal monsters, and Yugi just has some better cards than the first 3. But both of them stand out because they actually use very powerful staples like Raigeki. But they're not very hard either. You just sweep through them 3 times each and unlock Tier 2, right? Just like in EDS. No, not exactly. In this game, nearly every tier has further unlock requirements. There are 5 packs available to you at the beginning, and each Tier 2 character requires a different pack to be halfway collected before they appear. Then, each of them unlocks a new pack once beaten 10 times. Taking this into consideration, I tried to make the grind to unlocking these packs to be in a fun order. Beating Esperoba 10 times would unlock the Toon Summon Skull pack. Not only did this pack have great attribute recruiters like Mystic Tomato, but it also had Toon Summon Skull, Blue Eyes Toon Dragon, and Toon World, all of which are needed to unlock Pegasus. To unlock Esperoba, I needed to collect half of the Red Eyes Black Dragon pack I had unlocked from the beginning. So, every duel I had against the Tier 1 opponents, I chose that pack for my winnings until I collected what I needed. Afterwards, I just picked other packs until I got the rest of the Tier 2 duelists. With my deck slightly upgraded, I planned out how to approach Tier 3. They all require defeating Tier 2 duelists 5 times each, but I'm already beating them each 10 times to unlock their packs and get more cards. The other requirement they each have is you owning their trump card. Mai needs Harpy's Feather Duster, Bandit Keith needs Barrel Dragon, Joey needs Jinzo, okay, and I already talked about Pegasus. Obtaining these cards means getting lucky from pulls from their respective packs, since there's no password machine. Welcome to World Championships 2004, where beating the game is based on RNG, I guess. I chose to go after Mai since I already had Harpy's Feather Duster, and the pack she unlocks gets you to great cards like Sambaira the Dark, Kaiku the Ghost Destroyer, and Bazu the Soul Eater, all of which are good for the rest of the game, honestly. But the standard affair stops here because the remainder of the game is full of cheaters. The Tier 4 duelists are the ghouls, but instead of unlocking them individually, you have to duel them consecutively. That challenge isn't the problem though. No, it's at this point the game decides it's going to stop being fair and lets all Tier 4 and higher duelists ignore the ban list. The thing that prevents duelists from stacking their deck with 3 copies of every broken card? Yeah, that thing. Suddenly, you're facing down multiple Dark Holes and Raigekis blowing up your field every other turn. This didn't blow my mind as much as it should because I already knew about this from a decade-old review by DL Jadow. The poor guy decided to play this game without a guide, God bless his soul. Once you defeated each of the ghouls without losing in between, you unlock Merrick, who you have to duel next and win in order to keep him. Once you do, the ghouls disband into separate character slots. All of the ghouls just unlock reprint packs that include very few new cards, so unless you really want Spirit Reaper in a game whose duelists spam Raigeki, I don't have much else to say about them. So, we unlock Merrick as the first Tier 5 duelist, but it's impossible to move forward without changing our deck. Why is that, you ask? Because the Shizu refuses to show up unless your deck is entirely monsters and nothing else. Ladies and gentlemen, intuitive game design! But Vagabond, what's so ridiculous about that? It sounds like an interesting challenge. You think so? Let me remind you that this game gives 0 hints about anything. There is no dialogue, no help menus, nothing. The only text is on the selection screens and on your cards. There is no way to know this without a guide. But once you know, it's not hard because her deck is significantly powered down due to the challenge. Thankfully, the attribute recruiters and Bazoo are perfect in a deck like this. I also pulled some Guardian Sphinx to clear her field every turn and make things go quicker. The last 2 Tier 5 duelists are Kaiba and Shadi, who require you to beat specific duelists from before 10 times each to unlock. Tedious, but straightforward. So, we're 5 tiers deep. At this point in EDS, I had dueled a little over 70 times, if we don't count unlocking Simon and Truesdale, of course. But by this point in this game, not counting the extra duels I did to unlock packs, you need to duel over 160 times. Realistically, at this stage, I'm past 200 from unlocking packs, and there's still a whole tier left. To unlock Tier 6 opponents, all of Tier 5 needs to be dueled 15 times. So adding that to the total, we're at 190. Then, counting their individual requirements to show up, that's another 20. You're looking at the minimum of 210 duels to unlock every character and make the credits roll. And do you know what you get after doing all that? A completion percentage. Now, after all the effort you had to put in to get to this point, it decides now it wants to let you know how many cards you're missing. But not a list and not where to get them. No. We couldn't make it that easy. But they do have an alternative solution. By beating all Tier 6 duelists 20 times each, you get to access special booster packs that prioritize cards you haven't collected yet. Except, it's only 20 times if you don't lose. You need to have 20 more wins than losses against each of them. Part of me wants to be grateful they didn't make it consecutive, but honestly, I think that'd be entering Stockholm Syndrome territory, and I'm not about to do that over a game that was clearly half-assed. The duels I had with them weren't even hard, half of them were just summoning Slate Warrior and setting some cards, if that. I have no idea why at this point in the game they're doing this, but if you want those packs, that's another 100 duels at minimum. No thank you, I am tired and done. It's truly impressive that this game has less to offer than Stairway, but takes way longer to talk about. At this point you're probably wondering, Vagabond, do you just not enjoy dueling? You're playing a Yu-Gi-Oh game. Why would you complain about the game giving you incentive to keep playing it? Well, see, the opponents you have in these games are not fun. Yu-Gi-Oh is a fun game, but once you've played all sorts of formats from over the 20 years the game has to offer, you're no longer interested in fighting against derpy AI that just summons bad monsters or spams broken spells and traps. Early Yu-Gi-Oh is notorious for a handful of overpowered cards mixed in with some of the most uninteresting, unstrategic monster lineups the game would ever have. In fact, when Yu-Gi-Oh started in Japan, they got a truckload of useless normal monsters that were so unimportant they would never see the light of day in America. Real-life old Japanese booster packs were just onslaughts of weak cards with an occasional rare you would pull that objectively outclassed everything else. But guess what? A lot of those useless cards that we didn't get make their way into these games, wasting pack space and my time. And because we're so early on in the franchise's lifespan, there aren't many viable strategies to build beyond getting all the best generic cards. Everyone who plays these games is more or less going to build their deck with similar cards, and likewise, your opponents are going to pretend they have some theme by using different types and attributes from each other, but no actual card effects that play into them. Just because Mai is summoning birds, it doesn't mean she's playing a wind deck. Strategy will occasionally rear its head, like Mako preventing damage with Tornado Wall, or Odeon focusing more on trap cards, but most characters' deck themes are less threatening than the good generic cards. So what you're left with is waiting for every single opponent to either play bad cards that you would never consider, or broken cards that you are also using. It begs the question why there are even 800 plus cards in the game when you keep seeing the same 50. Ideally, the lackluster performance of the AI would be covered by the player's deck being unable to account for every possible strategy. This would make you rebuild your deck for different opponents and force you to think about strategy more. To cut these games a bit of slack, this was literally the beginning of Yu-Gi-Oh! And most people playing these games were children. But in a modern lens, it makes the experience here feel wholly outdated. But what if you're dueling another person? After all, multiplayer is an option in these games. Normally, I enjoy time capsules like this that force players to work within a more limited card pool. However, I don't have much praise to give about what's available in these games specifically. Going back this far would just be an effort to remove some newer cards you don't want to play with, but it's not like cards released in 2004 and 2005 would make the gameplay worse. When people think of Yu-Gi-Oh! In those years, they think of a better time with classic interactions. Going to 2002 and 2003 is usually just known as Caveman Yu-Gi-Oh! Where me have big number rules all. However, because these games are based on Japanese releases and not ours, a card like Slate Warrior that wasn't in the TCG then is in nearly every single one of these games. A 1900 attack non-tribute monster with 2 effects that impact battle quite a bit. There's a reason nearly every NPC uses this card in all 3 games. I won't say there's no interesting format to carve out of any of these 3 titles, but honestly, it's not one I'm interested in. That's why I use the password machine. There's more proper variety on the horizon, and I can wait a little longer for it. A quick glance at the dueling field lets you know that all the basics are here. You have your various zones for monsters, spells, and traps, field spells, graveyard, main deck, and as a throwback, fusion deck. You also have cards above and below the field in each player's hand. On the very bottom of the screen, you'll be told very basic information about whatever card you hovered over at the time, assuming it's public knowledge. Pressing the B button at any point where there isn't some kind of prompt up will allow you to change what phase of the turn you're in. All of this is very basic, and I'm sure helped a lot of kids understand the flow of a duel, especially when the anime at the time was making things up as it went along. Using a video game as a medium to duel instead of playing in real life should offer even more advantages. But here, it only creates setbacks that cause decisions to take much longer. The dueling layout in these games get the job done, and not really anything more. Actually, there's a good argument that it's not even the bare minimum. By now, I'm sure you've noticed the most glaring issue, which is that on the field overview, you can't even see what specific cards are in play until you hover over them individually. Not only do cards not have text in this perspective, but they have no picture. The only indicator is color, so even if you're someone like me who can tell what a card does by memory, you have no way of identifying it until you see its name. There are plenty of times where an opponent's card will be sent to the graveyard, either because it was discarded or destroyed, and to learn what it was, you have to go all the way over to their graveyard to see. In a word, this is inefficient. And while it's true that these games had limited power on the Game Boy Advance, I'm not entirely sold that this was the best they could do. By the end of the console's lifespan, Yu-Gi-Oh! Games no longer had this issue, but it was there for all 3 of these games. Like most Yu-Gi-Oh! Games, there are glitches to keep in mind. I've seen Yami Yugi ritual summon and give himself a ghost card in his hand, and there are occasional weird interactions where card effects don't resolve properly. You can find lists for these on the wiki, of course, but there is something further I want to talk about. Chain links. In Yu-Gi-Oh!, they're one of the things that make it not very beginner-friendly, and you know that's true when even the video games can't get them right. A lot of the time, these games won't ask you if you want to activate cards when it would be completely legal to. I'm not sure if I'm missing a setting or not, but this didn't seem to be a problem you could avoid. World Championships 2004 specifically is a dysfunctional mess for the opposite reason though. While yes, it still doesn't let you play cards in every legal situation, there are times where it will offer it illegally. I've played Call of the Haunted to bring back a monster before it had properly been sent to the graveyard, which resulted in the game destroying both the monster and Call of the Haunted when it didn't know how to handle it. This is a level of broken that isn't just inaccurate, but intrusive. Combining these 2 problems made me lose several games that I should not have, which is absurd for an official Yu-Gi-Oh! Game. I shouldn't have to figure out if the game is wrong or not before making a play it offered me, and then get punished not by the opponent, but by the game itself. When you combine these issues with very stupid AI and boring samey decks, I describe dueling in these games as playing solitaire with a very occasional disruption. The only times I felt on the edge of my seat were during the latter section of World Championships 2004, where any draw my opponent had could nuke my field. If that's what it takes to make duels compelling, I'll pass. The series' first version of a deck building screen did everything it really needed to. It let you skim through a list of all the cards you own in your trunk and add them into your main and side decks or remove them. You could sort them by card type and subcategories to make finding certain cards easier, and you could even view your deck's card type sorted by percentages. There are more detailed ways they could have included for searching and sorting, but at this point in the game's card pool, there weren't many combinations to search that you were missing here. World Championships 2004 moves in a different direction. There are no 2 out of 3 matches in this game, so the side deck has been removed entirely. Notably, the top of the screen now displays the quantity of each card type in your deck, which is cool to have displayed at all times instead of being tucked away in a different window. Even your sorting options are made easily accessible by just pressing A on any card. On top of that, you're allowed 3 different decks that you can swap between instead of just one. This may just be the one area that World Championships 2004 improved over the previous games. Still doesn't salvage it though. While I haven't been blown away by much of the gameplay or features, I do appreciate the retro vibes and pixel art style in these first few entries. Seeing classic Yu-Gi-Oh characters portrayed officially as sprites isn't something you'd see nowadays. The profile shots you get before dueling them in Eternal Duelist Soul is a huge source of its charm, as well as the various duelists having their own duel themes. Except World Championships 2004, because as usual has to go out of its way to be unlikable. In that game, every tier has its own music instead, and there are only 6. When I returned to EDS and Stairway after not playing for a while, I was surprised how much I enjoyed hearing the OST again. There are a few issues with the sound design in them though. Just like most parts of these games besides the story mode, they're nearly the same, in this case with the soundtrack, but where they differ is mostly menus. In EDS, when you use the password machine or edit your deck, you're greeted with complete silence. The only sounds are you moving up and down to different parts of the screen. This made both redeeming passwords for cards and deck building a little awkward and ominous. In Stairway, it's a different problem. While thankfully there is music in both of these menus now, the sound effect from EDS is still there and it kind of clashes. When you're actively doing work in either menu, things can get kind of grating on the ears. Visually, these games aren't stunning, but they get the job done. Stairway in particular lets you sort of travel around Domino City during the Battle City arc. You're not really exploring anything, but I appreciate that it's slightly dressed up compared to the other two. In my opinion, these games get most of their redeeming qualities from their old school feel, but since there isn't really much in terms of locations or events tied to the OST, there's not much else to say. Overall, I would not recommend any of these games. Their dueling interfaces are outdated, the opponents are boring, there's nearly no deck variety, and they're barely video games frankly. But I'm gonna make it a standard to try my best to pitch the games covered in Dimension Dive during the overview sections at the end, like this one. So, in summary, here is why you should play each of these games. Eternal Duelist Soul. It was the first Yu-Gi-Oh game to properly follow the real-life rules of the trading card game, released at the very beginning of Yu-Gi-Oh's migration to the West. Stairway to the Destined Duel. It was the first Yu-Gi-Oh game to mimic the Battle City arc from the anime and is the best experience out of the first several entries. World Championships 2004. It is deliberately frustrating, and convincing someone unfamiliar with it to play it serves as a genuinely funny practical joke. If everyone started saying World Championships 2004 is the best Yu-Gi-Oh game and are based enough to not snitch, getting big content creators to play it could be entertaining. And that's the video. If you have a deep appreciation or nostalgia for any of these 3 games, I hope you understand I'm not trying to offend you. If you enjoyed this video, I may or may not have uploaded another one already. One completely about 7 Trials to Glory perhaps. Well, if I did make that video, it should be clickable on your screen right now, and it would be super awesome if you checked it out. Oh, and all of you contrarians out there, I don't want you to click on it. This has been Vagabond, and you're watching Secret Village.